Hello and welcome. Today's webinar is Developing a New Accessibility Measure to Support Older Adults in a Post-Pandemic World. My name is Lacey Friedley. I'm the Communications Coordinator at Portland State University's Transportation Research and Education Center. TREC leads the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, a university transportation center funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. NITC consortium members, in addition to PSU, are the University of Utah, University of Oregon, University of Arizona, University of Texas at Arlington, and the Oregon Institute of Technology. NITC's research priority is improving mobility of people and goods to build strong communities. Our presenters today are Andy Hong and Zihao Wen of the University of Utah. Andy Hong is an assistant professor in the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. He is the director of the Healthy Aging and Resilient Places Lab, whose mission is to create healthier and more resilient places. His research focuses on the interplay between the built environment and human health, with a particular interest in developing place-based approaches to healthy aging. Zihao Wen is a graduate research assistant at the University of Utah. He works in the Trans Analytics Lab, which has a diverse portfolio of research projects ranging from software development and field implementation of innovative technologies, all the way to methodological and theoretical contributions to the field of transportation. Before we dive into the presentation, I'd like to let you know about another upcoming NITC webinar. On March 14th, Lad Keefe and Christina Kearns of the University of Arizona will share research on assessing cool corridor heat resilience strategies for human-scale transportation. Just a quick overview, today's presentation will be about 40 minutes long, then we will have 15 minutes to answer your questions. During the presentation, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to the video recording and presentation slides. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. A certificate of completion will be posted on the event page within 24 hours after the webinar ends. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction. Let me actually share our slides. Okay. All right. So my name is Andy Hong, and I'm here with Zihao. I am based in the urban planning department, whereas Zihao is based in civil engineering. So we're going to be able to combine two different worlds and to speak two different languages. Hopefully this is unified effort to be able to come up with a new transportation measure for older adults. So our presentation will cover four topics. So starting with the background, we're going to start with the research context, research goal. We're going to talk about our methods. We did a mixed method, so it includes survey, focus groups, and more of a quantitative accessibility analysis. And we're going to present our findings on 3 of those method of analysis, and then we're going to end our slides with key takeaways. All right, so let me start with some background. So as you know, the aging population is going to be give us a big challenge in the next 50 to 60 years. Globally speaking, the number of older adults will double in the next 30 years or so, which will be around 2 billion. Right now, it's around a little bit over 1 billion. It's going to be double in the next 30 years or so. In the US, the older adults will also double from 52 million to close to 1 billion by 2060, which means that 1 in 4 Americans will be older adults by 2060. So if you look at the demographic trajectories over the next 40 years or so, you can see that there is a golden cross happening around 2034, where the older adult population will exceed the number of younger adults. So what this tells us is that we need to be thinking about these growing older adult population on all kinds of infrastructure issues, including transportation. Especially for older adults, mobility is a big issue. And you might have heard a term called aging in place. So a recent survey shows that more than 80% of older adults preferred to live in their place as long as possible. But that comes with a lot of difficulties, which includes transportation to essential services and daily needs. So for people living in rural areas with not a good transportation services or even public transit, aging in place is going to be a challenge. And during COVID, older adults were the hardest hit by the pandemic, and they struggled with transportation, especially for those relying on public transit services or the aided transportation services like dial-a-ride, because a lot of these transportation services were shut down during the pandemic. Especially older adults have unique mobility challenges because of declining physical and cognitive health as they age. And oftentimes when you become an age of 80 plus or 90, you can no longer drive because of a lot of these declining functional characteristics. And sometimes some places they restrict driving for older adults by law because it becomes extremely dangerous for older adults to drive. The problem is the current transportation systems lags consideration of older adults, these unique vulnerabilities. The legal framework is really effective in barring older adults from driving, but then there's not so much of an alternative solutions when people can no longer drive or can have very limited mobility capabilities. When it comes to accessibility, as you know, the accessibility is really fundamental to people's daily lives, to get good, to essential services and meet the daily needs. And the COVID-19, especially for older adults living in care facilities, the pandemic has aggravated this inequality across different older adult populations. So it's extremely important to measure older adults' access to essential services more comprehensively, not just the traditional way of measuring accessibility through a quantitative measure, but also using some sort of a qualitative measure to understand their mobility needs and access. And this is also necessary for us to prepare our transportation infrastructure, our transportation services to meet the needs of this growing aging population. So this is our research goal. We have three-pronged approach. First is to really get the basics. So try to understand travel behavior of older adults, both in urban and rural communities. We have some rural communities in the state of Utah. The second goal is to identify barriers and challenges of older adults experiencing current and future mobility challenges. So we're not just interested in the barriers and challenges experienced by the older adults currently, but what are some of these future mobility challenges that may be experienced, that may be that can be predicted from older adults' perspective. Lastly, we aim to develop an accessibility measure for older adults that considers both the supply side and the demand side of transportation, which the Zihao is going to talk about in a bit. So overall, our goal was to understand older adults' mobility challenges, needs, and understand the future directions and how best we can prepare for this aging population. Okay, so we're going to move on to our methods. So with these goals, we came up with 3 different ways to understand older adults' mobility and accessibility challenges. So we conducted a survey targeting older adults 50 and plus living in Utah. Usually the definition of older adults is usually around 65 plus, or based on World Health Organization at 60 plus, but we wanted to cast a wider net and be able to compare slightly younger older adults. So older adult generations, we tend to think older adults as just one group of people, but it's actually not. People who are in their relatively younger stage have different characteristics, both physically, mentally, and psychologically, compared to their much older counterparts. People who are over the age of 80 or 90, they have very different characteristics. So we wanted to cast a wider net to be able to understand older adult in general. And to do that, we did both a paper-based survey and also an online-based survey, and which we're going to talk about later. But basically, we wanted to not only just focus on online survey because of a particular needs from older adult communities. Sometimes it's much easier for older adults to just fill out the survey on a paper form. Second, we conducted a focus group to really understand older adults' challenges and limitations when it comes to transportation. And we recruited focus group participants from our survey. So we already know a lot of their demographics, we know their general travel characteristics and whatnot. But what we were trying to focus was to identify some of these challenges when it comes to transportation resources, also their opportunities, and some, understand their realistic challenges when it comes to their personal and personal needs. And lastly, we also conducted an accessibility analysis. And we used this particular method called two-step floating catchment area method, TSFCA, which is quite popular in geography, but not so much utilized in transportation field. So basically, the 2SFCA method allows us to capture not only the supply side of transportation resources, but also the demand side coming from the population's characteristics. So we were trying to capture both the demand side and the supply side of transportation needs. And we did a little bit of Google API. We relied on Google API to calculate some of these metrics for accessibility analysis. And we also integrated some of our survey data as part of our accessibility analysis, as well as more on the national surveys to come up with more comprehensive accessibility measure. So the initial recruitment for the survey was a bit challenging. We were not meant to be collecting samples that are representative of the whole Utah population. So it was naturally more of a convenient sampling, but we try to utilize existing research registries from Center on Aging, Utah Health and Hospitals. So they already have a list of individuals that are that showed interest in involving research activities. So that was a really useful resource to tap into. But we also partner with various nonprofits, including Utah Commission on Aging and area agencies and AARPs. There are resources. And what worked really well was we made a partnership with the Utah Department of Health and Human Services. They are not necessarily a transportation agency, but they deal with older adults all the time. They have Meals on Wheels services. They have all kinds of programs and services that are reaching out to hard to reach older adults. So we were able to utilize these network to collect our survey data and as well as recruit participants for our focus group. And as you can see, we did both the digital recruitment and also door-to-door, face-to-face recruitment. Of course, this was a bit challenging because the research was done during COVID or post-COVID, I would say. So there were a lot of challenges in terms of reaching out to older adults in person. But by utilizing some of these existing networks through nonprofits and government agencies, we were able to tap into some of these hard to reach older adults across the state of Utah. This shows just a sample of our survey. We try to make it a little more general, not just focusing on transportation accessibility, but try to be more general in terms of transportation and health survey. Of course, we did a traditional travel diary type of data collection, but also we collected measures about health, general health, some specific health measures, including some depression, isolation because of the COVID situations. We were very much interested in understanding some of these other health aspects. And again, we did both online survey and paper survey, and what worked most effectively was the paper survey. And there were a lot of, it was very labor intensive to be able to mail out these surveys back and forth and move all these data and enter this into a digital database. But in the end, I believe it was worthwhile to rely on these more traditional paper-based survey measures. For our focus group, it was relatively easy because we already did a outreach through our surveys, and we asked any focus group participant through our surveys, and we were able to recruit 18 people. And we did the focus groups during the summer and during the winter. And we were very considerate about our location of the focus groups. So the focus group, we try to hold the focus group in a public space. Particularly, this was a Salt Lake City library location. It was more of a central location that everyone knows. So we chose this location as our central place for focus groups. Moving on to the accessibility analysis, so the Zihao is going to talk about the research methods.
Hi, thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Zihao, and I will introduce the research matter about the accessibility. 2SFCA has 2 steps. For step 1, each supply point, we can generate a catchment area based on the threshold travel time. And then we can search the demand point within the catchment area and calculate the supply to demand ratio based on this formula 1. And the sum here is to sum the population. And for step 2, each demand point, we can generate a catchment area too. And also, and then we can search the supply point within the catchment area and calculate the sum of supply to demand ratio based on the formula 2. The sum here is to sum the supply to demand ratio. And the f function here is the decay function. This is what we want to calibrate in the next. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Now we come to generalized time. This section corresponds to the contribution 1 in the new 2SFCA matter. The generalized time is the measure to evaluate the overall cost of a trip, taking into account not only non-monetary costs, but also monetary costs. In previous study, most of the studies using 2SFCA is only considered distant, not the monetary cost. So here we will calculate the generalized time based on the formula 3, and T is the travel time, M is the monetary cost. We can estimate travel time based on the online map, the Google Map API, and calculate the monetary cost based on the travel distance. So what we're going to do is to calibrate the lambda. Lambda here is the value of time. We will calibrate lambda based on the 2017 National Household Chores Survey data. And we can fit the relationship between lambda and income like the formula here shows. Finally, by introducing the generalized time as a spatial impedance instead of only the travel time, and then we can update the decay function of the new 2SFCA matter, incorporate not only time but also cost. The next section is the threshold travel time, but the threshold travel time here is the local threshold travel time. This section corresponds to the contribution 2 of the new 2SFCA. In previous study, people used the set the threshold travel time based on the authority guidelines. For example, for healthcare, the recommendation travel time may be 30 minutes, then they will use the 30 minutes to be the threshold travel time. In this study, I used the distance matrix API in Google Maps to get the travel distance and travel time. Then we will calculate the local threshold time based on this data. First, for one type of facility, we estimate the travel time for each pair of demand and supply points and get the travel time matrix. Then we can get the travel time from each demand point to the nearest supply point and get the minimum travel time sets. Then we take the 95% quantile of the set as the local threshold travel time for that type of facility. Thus, if we treat another type of facility and repeat the steps above, for all types of facilities, we can get the local threshold travel time for different types of facility. Yeah, next slide. The last section of mine is integrated accessibility. This section corresponds to the contribution 3. In previous study, 2SFCA is used to measure the accessibility for one type of facility, for example, healthcare facility or recreation facility. So, but here we want an integrated accessibility. So in previous study, one integration method is to average the accessibility of each types of facility. That assumes all the adults value each type of facility consistent. For example, shopping is as important as recreation. However, older people will visit some facilities more frequently. That indicates they have more demand for those facilities. So higher weight should be assigned to facilities that are visited more frequently. In this study, we will first normalize the accessibility of different facilities, and then we can sum them up based on the weights. The weight here is the ratio of the frequency of one facility and the sum of all types of facilities frequencies. Yeah, that's all for my part. Let's turn back to Andy's part.
All right, so based on these three mode of data collections, we now move on to our findings. So this shows a general spatial distribution of our study participants. Our total sample size was around 830, with the online participants about 176 and paper surveys 654 responses. And as you can see, this is the Salt Lake Valley areas. A lot of our participants are concentrated on the valley, but we also had participants from these rural and suburban areas, St. George, Cedar Cities, and some places around Moab. So we had quite a bit of good distribution in terms of their geographic locations. This is a general descriptive summary of our survey participants. And so this column shows our study sample characteristics, and in comparison to the general population based on the census data. And as you can see, we are slightly more oversampled in terms of older adult populations, especially with the 70 to 80 plus. But it generally matches the general Utah population demographics, and the Utah is predominantly white, so it generally matches the census population as well. What's different is in our sample we have a lot more lower income older adults. So compared to census, we have 35, close to 35% older adults with income level less than 30K. And also, I guess it was kind of a lucky, but we were able to recruit people living in rural areas. So compared to 17 in the state of Utah, we were able to recruit people living in rural areas more so. And in terms of their physical functions and mobility status, we have about 38% with mobility aids, and that generally matches with the census populations 65 plus with disability status. So this is basically the regression modeling results, looking at the different travel behavior outcomes as a function of all these characteristics. So keep in mind that the travel frequency is based on a trip to a preferred activity destinations. We ask in the survey what are their preferred activity destinations and rank them there in terms of their order. And all these trip frequencies was captured on a weekly basis. So as you can see, the travel distance was negatively correlated particularly with very old populations compared to their younger counterparts. And this is generally expected because the older you get, your travel distance would naturally decrease. When it comes to income levels, we saw positive correlation between older adults' income and their frequency of travel, which is also expected because the more means, the more resources, that means you have more opportunities to travel outside. When it comes to urban and rural differences, this is as expected. Travel times are positively correlated with people living in rural areas. Also positive correlation with travel distance. And obviously that's, general trends in people living in rural areas. And what was interesting was we saw a positive correlation between their health and people's travel frequency, and it aligns well with their mobility, the assistive device. So people without assistive device, people maintaining general health, there was a positive correlation with the frequency of their travel. Moving on to their satisfaction with travel. So it was quite interesting because compared to their younger counterparts, we start noticing that the very old group of older adults were their satisfaction level was significantly and highly negatively correlated. So meaning that some people older adults groups between 60 to 69, some of their travel satisfaction was negatively correlated, but for people in 90 plus, their satisfaction level was very, very much highly negatively correlated with their satisfaction, which is quite expected and aligns with some of the literature in the previous years. Again, we see a high correlation, a positive correlation between income and travel satisfaction. And of course, this aligns with other types of travel characteristics, but keep in mind that we try to control for their age demographics and then other factors as well. So you can see that income plays an important role in terms of their not only just their travel outcome, but their travel satisfaction. Same story with the travel behavior outcomes, positive correlation between general health and travel satisfaction, and which aligns with their the use of assisted device. What was interesting was we found, so this is not just a linear model, but we used the generalized additive model to see if there's any non-linear relationship between all these characteristics and their travel satisfaction. We found that there was a non-linear pattern, which I'm going to show later. And lastly, we looked at the type of destinations and whether these type of destinations are correlated with travel satisfaction. And you can see some of these travel activities, such as visiting cafe, bar, meeting friends and families, are highly correlated with their travel satisfaction. So in the old geriatric or gerontology literature, these destinations were understood as a social place, or they call it what they call a third place. The third place is a place. It's not a home. It's not a workplace. It's a somewhere in between. And you can see that these social place, third place, are deemed important for travel satisfaction with older adults. I'm just showing the general breakdown of the mode of travel for these social activities compared to other activities. The overwhelmingly people are taking more transit for visiting these social destinations versus other destinations, meaning that the public transit would be an important mode of transportation to support these social activities for older adults. So this is what I called the curvilinear relationship between travel frequency and travel satisfaction. So it seems like there's a threshold when it comes to travel satisfaction, which makes sense because travel threshold around 17 trips per week to key destinations. If you do more trips than that, their satisfaction level starts to decline. So we can see that there's a bit of a sweet spot when it comes to supporting these travel behavior for older adults to maximize their travel satisfaction. And not a lot of previous research have looked at this point. Usually people have looked at the linear relationship between travel behavior and travel satisfaction. What we found from our study was that there may be the threshold effects when it comes to travel behavior. Moving on to our more qualitative results. So we did focus groups with older adults and trying to understand their modal behaviors and their satisfactions with different mode of transportation. And we were able to identify different sort of, group of travel behaviors. We initially hypothesized that there will be a lot of people using single mode, but what turns out was that we saw a lot of people actually mixing different modes. And people who are more reliant on car driving was predominantly single modal individuals. So we were able to group them into their tendency to mix different modes. So we basically looked at people who are using single mode, primarily driving, versus people who are mixing different modes of transportation. We saw a huge spectrum of travel behavior among older adults. And focusing on their attitudes towards driving, depending on their travel tendency, modal tendency, people who are single modal, super single modal, we try to label them in terms of the super single versus the super multimodal, and people who are maintaining the single modal travel trends, they generally kept positive attitudes travel to car driving, although there were some concerns about practical issues such as rising gas prices and safety. When it comes to super multimodal group, we saw no positive opinions on car travel. Of course, there were concerns about cost and safety, but their attitudes to car driving was different between super single modal versus super multimodal. When it comes to public transit attitudes, super single modal people who are more reliant on car driving generally maintained negative attitudes about public transit. And some people didn't even have experience with public transit at all. And super multimodal group, on the other hand, maintained slightly positive opinions about public transit. But what was interesting was that they had more complaints about using public transit. So they had very detailed opinions about public transit service, their frequency. So transit is not always available and convenient for them, but they use it because it was more satisfying. It was more cost effective in terms of their needs. But it was kind of interesting to see that even with people who are reliant on public transit or mixing multiple modes of transportation, they didn't have a very positive aspects about public transit. But I guess because they use more public transit, generally they know more about public transit service. Therefore, they know all these problems and issues with public transit, which was interesting finding from our focus group. Moving on to in terms of the major themes with their current travel behavior, overwhelmingly, regardless of their modal tendency, the desire to stay independent was the common theme across these different groups. So it was quite interesting because the single modal groups who are reliant on car travel, they drive car because they want to stay independent. Whereas people who are on the multimodal group, they also want to stay independent, and that's why they want to mix different modes. If they can't drive anymore, they want to be able to keep they want to be able to keep their mobility, using different modes. So that's why they try to mix different modes, not only just relying on cars, but they thought that mixing different modes would help them stay independent. So for people who are more on the single modal tendency, they usually have very strong modal attachment, especially for cars. And a lot of them were trying to be maintaining their status quo. Whereas people who are more multimodal seems to be more adventurous, exploring different modes and being more adaptive to different situations, which was quite interesting, difference between these two different groups with different modal tendency. When it comes to future travel, overwhelmingly, we found people who are maintaining quite passive mode choice, very passive in terms of their modal behavior. They want to stick with their current behavior. They want to keep driving until they die, which may not be possible, but they maintain very passive, attitudes towards modal choice. Whereas people who are more actively, seeking out different mode of transportation, they maintained very flexible modal choice when it comes to different modes. So they were open to changing not only just driving, but also trying public transit, walking or biking, thinking about different ways to travel. And some people were even willing to change their environmental location, their residence, to be able to support their aging in place. If when there comes a time when they can no longer drive, they want to be able to use different mode of transportation, and maybe their current residential location may not be conducive to support these different mode of transportation. So I would say this is probably the most adaptive behavioral thinking when it comes to aging in place, because they want to be able to support their travel and mobility, and they're even thinking about moving close to cities. Whereas the majority of people that we did a focus group maintain quite passive attitudes. They just want to stay home. They don't want to explore new mode of transportation. They just want to maintain their status quo, which was not really ideal for helping them to adapt to new environment or new situations. But a lot of older adults were quite adamant in terms of keeping their status quo, which may be quite problematic when we move on to the supporting, developing transportation infrastructure for older adults, because if they have maintained a very passive behavior, passive attitudes, it will be really difficult for them to try different mode of transportation. So this tells us that there may be a lot of investment, not only just in terms of physical infrastructure, but in terms of education, in terms of these the behavioral strategies to be able to help them adapt to new situations when they get older. So we're moving on to the results for the accessibility analysis.
Yes, we did a case study in Salt Lake County. I will first take healthcare accessibility as an example to analyze. Figure A here is the healthcare accessibility based on TC to SFCA, and B is the healthcare accessibility based on traditional to SFCA, only consider distance. And figure C is the ratio of the accessibility measured by traditional to SFCA and TC matters. We can also call it inflation factor. And figure D is the accessibility based on the 30 minutes catchment area. 30 minutes is the recommended travel time for a hospital. Compare figure A and B, they have similar distributions of accessibility. That indicates TC is effective However, there are some minor differences between A and B. In the middle of region 3 in figure A, some tracks are different from the surrounding tracks. The surrounding tracks can access healthcare facilities both close to their home and those farther away. The middle tracks have moderate distance to those healthcare facilities. So when we only consider time, their accessibility are similar. But when we consider both time and cost, older adults live in surrounding tracts may still be willing to travel because they can choose to go to the healthcare facility close to their home. They can spend less time and cost. However, those live in middle tracts may not travel because it will cost money no matter which facility they are going. Then the accessibility in the middle will decrease. These final variations are exactly what we want to capture. Therefore, a more precise spatial distribution can be measured by TC to SFCA compared with the traditional one. In figure C, we can see most accessibility based on traditional 2SFCA are 3 times higher than that based on TC to SFCA. That means TC to SFCA can overcome the overestimation issues and only consider travel time will cause the overestimation. In figure D, the distribution is very different from figure A. Tracks with accessibility greater than 10 account for more than 90% of the total. That means most of the tracks have high accessibility. That's because when the threshold travel time is set to 30 minutes, each track can access most facilities. So the catchment area loss is significant. Therefore, we should set a reasonable catchment area based on the local situations. The next slides. And this distribution of shopping, meals, recreation, and religion accessibility for older adults are shown in this figure. As we can see, for shopping, meals, and recreation accessibility, they distribute very uniform and hold high accessibility. That means in this fields of facilities, they can meet the need of older adults. And then next slide. Next, we go to the integrated accessibility. The meaning of each figure is the figure 1A is the integrated accessibility based on the new 2SFCA, and the figure B is the accessibility based on cumulative opportunities, one traditional measurement of the spatial accessibility. And figure C shows the relationship between resources, opportunities per person, and accessibility. And figure D shows the integrated accessibility based on TC to SFCA, but use the equal weights, not the frequency. Compare figure A and B, the differences are mainly reflected in the lower part, which is highlighted by the black. In figure B, the lower part has lower accessibility because it has less opportunities. In figure A, even though the opportunities are less, but the population density is also low, so it may still have higher accessibility. For in figure C, it's very hard to directly identify the relationship between opportunities per person and accessibility. So I will first look at their natural logarithm. It's even said they fit the linear regression. That shows when accessibility is low, the accessible resources per person are insufficient. As the accessibility increase, resources per person increase too. Compare with the traditional cumulative opportunity, the integrated accessibility in this study can reflect the opportunities per person is more realistic. Figure D shows the main difference between A and B is the green and yellow regions. The green regions have higher recreation and religion accessibility. The yellow region have higher shopping accessibility. As we can see here in the table, shopping has the most weight, so it is more reasonable to assign larger weights to more critical or frequently used facility. And yes, please the next slide. And the Paris trip frequency is based on the National Household Travel Survey data. So the table here shows the survey data based on our research. The trip frequency is different from the National Household Travel Survey data. Using our survey data, the accessibility of the west side of the map has increased, as highlighted by the black. This may be due to an increased weight of religion and recreation accessibility. They increased by about 25% and 400% respectively. Well-being and quality of life can be achieved through older adults, devoting more time to actions and tasks related to community life, recreation and leisure, religion, and spending time with family and friends. So participation and leisure activities contribute to successful and healthy aging. This translates well because with higher demand for religious and recreation activities among older adults. With the survey data, accessibility of the center of the map has decreased, driven by a decrease in the weight of shopping accessibility as shown in this table, and it decreased by about 54%. The decrease in the shopping accessibility weight might be due to the increase in the weight of other activities that still indicates some participation in the leisure activity is more important in older populations. And using the trip frequency of the survey data for weighting, the cumulative opportunity-based accessibility does not vary much. That's because the new waste does not vary much compared to the equal waste. And yeah, that's the results for the accessibility part.
All right, so now moving on to the key takeaways of our research. I guess we're sort of running out of time, so I'll be brief. So what we found from this mixed method research was that there was actually a wide spectrum of aging population. So this is our tagline: not all adults are the same; they're created equal. And travel behaviors differs by different age groups. And especially when it comes to old groups, usually 85 plus, we found significant vulnerability when it comes to their mobility capability. So this confirms that participants or in this age categories, we would need a more attention in terms of understanding their travel behavior, because this is it aligns with other previous research that this indicates probably the most vulnerable period. So while we tend to think about older adults as one group of population, we might need to think about more specialized, more targeted approaches when we think about developing strategies for different groups of older adults. Also, we found a wide spectrum of travel behavior. So we expected that there may be sort of, car versus transit groups, but in fact, we found wide spectrum of travel behavior with older adults. And while a lot of people relied on single modes, especially car driving, we found that many older adults mix different mode of transportation, and their attitudinal and their behavioral patterns were different from people relying on single mode.
Oh yeah. For our new method developed in this project, the TC2SFCA, the method has several advantages. TC2SFCA can overcome the overestimation and identify finer spatial difference. The local threshold travel time can enable a more reasonable identification of relative difference, and the integrated accessibility here can reflect the resources available per person. And based on the results, we can see traditionally less accessible areas such as West Valley has higher accessibility, which is different from our basic intuition. That may be because older adults have often engage in non-work related travel, and the accessibility of shopping, meals, and recreation is high in most areas, and it can meet the needs of older adults. And some areas like West Valley City, Mill Creek, Holiday, Cottonwood, and its exhibits lower healthcare accessibility. Maybe it can offer some insights for the agents to introduce door-to-door or curb-to-curb transportation service in these areas. And for the integrated accessibility, for the there are also some key takeaways for the integrated accessibility. We found that checking how often older adults use facility gives us a better idea of accessibility. This helps us see resources per person and which facility matter most. And in the case study, we discovered that for most older drivers, mobility matters more than accessibility. Surprisingly, some traditional less accessible area is higher. This is because they mainly travel for non-work activities. It seems like accessibility is okay for most older adults in the Solid County. And we need to realize that this is based on healthcare seniors who still drive, but people older than 85 rarely value driving. If those people don't drive, have a lower income and a disability or health issues, then the accessibility will become a big deal. We need to work on better measures and policies specifically for those specific groups. Also, our study didn't look at social stuff like hanging out with family because it is tricky to pinpoint those locations. So there are some limitations in this accessibility analysis and also some meaningful findings. Thank you.
So moving on to the final takeaway, thinking about the planning for future. So as we discussed, the older adults have different needs and wants and values when it comes to travel preferences, both for current and future mobilities. We looked at the different spectrum of aging, different spectrum of travel behaviors. But what unites us together is the desire to stay independent. So that was the common identified themes across different age groups, different mobility groups. And as long as we support them to stay independent, whether through single mode or multi-mode, that would be the most important aspect for future policies. And one thing in particular, we found that there are the majority of people maintain mostly passive attitudes when it comes to travel behavior. So not only just focusing on physical infrastructure, but thinking about educational strategy, thinking about the more of a learning opportunities for them to experience different mode of transportation. I think that will be increasingly more important when we try to think about supporting aging population for future travel needs. And lastly, we need to be thinking about different groups of aging population in terms of their age categories, and we need more targeted policies towards older individuals who have trouble coping with the future mobility challenges, especially for those who are the age of 85 plus. We found particular vulnerabilities with people who are in this old age categories. So that concludes our slides, and we would like to thank and acknowledge all our partners and collaborators, especially the National Institute for Transportation and Communities for providing funding for this research, and the nonprofits, including Utah Center on Aging, Utah Commission on Aging, and other agency departments that allow and support our research. Thank you so much.
Thanks for a great presentation, Andy and Zihao, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.